Hi, everybody. To the whole lot of you, yeah. So we have three panelists in addition to me here. There's Thomas Andreasen here from Playlab. Then Ivo Wubbels. Is that how I pronounce your name, actually? Yeah, okay, great. And Chris Natsuume. Okay, So this is the Indie Game Studio Survival panel. Why survival? Because we are all old here. Maybe not Thomas, but anyway, yeah. And we've been around for quite a long time. We've never been rich, except Thomas, but...
Get out.
But we're still here. So this panel is really about how to be a cockroach. So let me have the panelists introduce themselves. First, Chris.
Hi, everybody. That's actually me up there for those who haven't been. And anyway, I'm Chris Natsuume. I run a studio called Boomzap. We are about 12 years old now. We're down in Southeast Asia predominantly. We're a totally virtual studio. Everybody lives and works from home. We have 27 people across 8 countries, I think, now. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, I don't know, some other places. I'm up in Japan. We've shipped something like 45 games in our lifespan. So, yeah, that's us. I'll talk more about that later.
Okay, and then Ivo.
We're in the wrong order, but it's okay. I'm Ivo Wubbels, founder of Engine Software. We're the oldest game developer in Holland. Started in the early 90s, so over 20 years already. We shipped, I think, I lost count, but over 150 titles from small to bigger on probably every platform you can imagine, most of them at least. So in the business for a long time and still doing well, so I think I deserve my spot here.
Okay, great. And finally, the outsider, Thomas.
Yes, that's me. On the young person on the panel,
yeah,
with the you oldies. No, I started a company called Playlab 5 years ago. We started doing match 3 type of games. We had a lot of success with one of our very first titles called Juice Cubes. We co-published it together with Rovio, the Angry Birds guys, which became massively successful, which helped us grow the studio from around 20 people up to 100 and something people, 105. And then last year we actually raised, I think, the biggest round in Southeast Asia for a games company from Monks Hill Ventures. And then...
that's good
we've
enough.
done an internal spin out of our Philippine studio. So we have a studio in Bangkok and in Philippines. That's it.
Okay, and then there's me. I have started Sanuk Games in Thailand in 2003, which is about 13 years ago. And we have been doing a number of things. We have been almost bankrupt a number of times, but presently we're doing games on PC and consoles, arcade games and sports simulation games. And we are, at this point, living properly out of it. But like last year, I was this close to shutting down the business because it was not working at all. So yeah, there's up and downs, and that's what this panel will be about, with the first question being, in fact, now for an indie studio, what is the hottest platform? What platform would be the best bet at this point in time? Would you go PC or consoles, or consoles? Would you go mobile? Would you actually target VR, like many people want to do? What would you do? Who gets started on that?
I'll go for it. I think first of all you have to define what an indie is before you can define what market you should be going for. Because if you're an indie studio of somewhere between 1 to 5 people or 10 maybe, then I think I would go in a different direction than if I'm a studio at 50 people, which I also consider an indie, and even 100 people compared to some of the giants in the space. So if I'm a small indie, I would go to the places and the marketplaces where the big guys aren't going because it takes too much effort and the revenue potential is not big enough for them to actually focus on. So that would be, I don't know, Steam, maybe Amazon, or like the external kind of platforms that you can go to that some of the bigger players aren't really focusing on. So that would kind of be the easiest way to generate revenue for your business. And if you're, of course, the bigger you get, the more main platforms you need to go. iOS, Android, that's mobile is my experience, is what works the best, and that's what worked for us. So that's where I would go if you're somewhere in the 20 to 100 people kind of company size.
I could say something about that. I also think you should define what kind of indie studio it is. Is it like, because what you see is more like professional studios, and you get more like, call it amateur hobby studios. Guys just from school, not having to pay their mortgage yet, so they can be living cheap. So if you can living cheap and have a team like that, you can take more risk and take other directions than when you have a bigger studio and everybody needs to get their salaries on time. And so that's also a big thing to consider. It depends on what kind of studio you have, what kind of directions you should look into.
I would argue that you have to have a plan, right? And your plan is going to be about what kind of title you're going to have, what kind of user you're going to have, and that's going to define the platform. So, if somebody says, I'm going to make a turn-based strategy game, I'm not sure that targeting iPhones is, your best bet. But I think it doesn't start from the platform. I don't think you say, are we going to make a PC game or are we going to make a console game? I think you start with, we have a good idea for how to market this kind of game that we want to build. And I pointedly say that you start with the marketing, right? You start with, how am I going to sell this thing? And then that leads you to, okay, well, here's the different distribution channels. Because it's not just, am I going to be on PC? Well, are you going to be on PC selling through Big Fish? Are you going to be on PC selling through Steam? Are you going to be, are you on Android selling through all the various app stores in Southeast Asia? Are you on Google Play? It's not just as simple as mobile or PC, right? But the core answer is, you need to start with, this is how I intend to market my game. And that leads you to
game, make money.
Yeah. Market a game in a way that will sell units and make money.
True.
And through that, you figure out what your platform is.
Is there a realistic chance in terms of odds for a small studio like 5 persons to do something on mobile now?
If you're very lucky, probably.
I mean, well, not just to do it, but to make a living out of it, obviously.
I think, we've talked about this before. I'm of the opinion that mobile right now is a lottery. It's very much a lottery that you're going to hit a lucky spot. But the problem is the price of the lottery ticket is a really good game marketed well, right? And even if you do everything right with the marketing, you do everything right with the game development, and everything's perfect, even then you still just have a lottery ticket. And if you're willing to be, if you're a small studio and you're 2 people and you don't mind cranking out those lottery tickets for 4 years while you work a full-time job somewhere, yeah, maybe there is a valid place for you on the App Store. But if you've got 20 people and you're paying bills every month, I'm not sure that you can afford to keep buying those lottery tickets because they get very, very expensive.
I don't
either, actually. Thomas?
I like my thoughts around that is again, there's the difficulty for a lot of indies is to grow, and that's because they haven't figured out how to generate revenue. So my recommendation to those guys is always look at the top grossing charts and see which of those games you have the technical and the team and the size that you can compete with those, because those top grossing games are doing millions of dollars a day. Some of them 100,000 or whatever, but at least you're going towards a market that's already established, and you're not going for it from a hobby perspective. And then it becomes, if you're doing it from a hobby perspective, it becomes a lottery ticket. But if you're going after an existing market, existing users that are willing to pay, and there's a proven model that works for it, I see the lottery. I see it as like you can call it a lottery ticket, but you can control if you're going to win or not on that lottery ticket.
But can you do it as a small studio?
that's where I'm saying, like, I wouldn't go for maybe Summoner's War or some of the games that are doing very well that requires 15 man years of development or whatever. I would go for something where you actually, where there's a proven model in the grossing charts, where they are grossing, and the complexity of the game is low enough for you to actually manage that and execute it on it, even if you're a small team.
Yeah, but the problem is that sounds good, but I mean, there's 50 other developers that are doing the same thing this week.
50?
Yeah, actually,
For that one particular game that you chose this week, there's 50 other developers, and some of those guys are going to be good.
Interrupt you 1 second to move to the second question because you're already answering it. Would you follow the trends or would you pick an untapped niche? So yeah, Thomas, you would follow the trends. You would analyze the trends and position yourselves on the trends.
I think that's, in my opinion, it's the most logical and reasonable decision to do. Is there's an existing market, you go after that, and what you try to do a better job than the existing people in that market. It's just way better than thinking I'm going to create the next zombie shooter first-person thing where there's not really a massively established market for it. And even if you do crack the zombie first-person shooter thing, turn-based RPG really, really well, the upside potential of that lottery ticket is a lot smaller than if you actually go for some of the major markets. So it's a balancing act that also depends on your own team and your own comfort and capabilities of what you think you can go for. My decision is with our Philippine studio is basically we have the talent, we have the team size, we have the knowledge and the things that we need to become a top player in the social casino space. That's why we're there, and it's an industry that has been predictably scalable. So you can see all the charts and the grossing charts on App Annie and even other solutions out there where you can see you put money into advertising and it actually comes back with a profit.
But as Chris says, I mean, there's how many other companies doing that who are bigger than you?
That's hard. That's why I'm saying you have to select something that you can actually think you can excel at and do something that's better than currently on the market.
So I'd like to offer a contrasting opinion.
Fire away.
I get what you're saying. I get that point, but if you're looking, I think for you in the casino space, there's something there. But I think for a lot of other indies who are watching this, hopefully there's a video or something, to go out and say like, oh, I played the latest Supercell game and there's obviously a bunch of people playing the Supercell game. I bet I could do one like it. That sounds like just banging your head against a wall to me.
But you need to be self-aware, right?
Yeah.
You can't, if you're a 1 or 2 man studio, you can't create a Supercell game at the same quality, the same latency, the same backend,
well,
and everything like that.
Even if you're competing against something that was made by a very small team, from the day that you start making it, the people who made the thing that you're, cloning, they're also building something. They're improving that, and they've got data, and they've got users, and they've got a lot of stuff that you don't have.
Yeah, a first mover advantage.
Yeah, so you're gonna come into that market much later with a product that's kind of comparable to what they had 2 months ago. I would argue, for a small indie, a better angle would be the pick an untapped niche angle of. This is a thing that I know I can get a reasonable number of users. I think that the big problem is people come into mobile with this Supercell dream, right? I'm gonna be at the top of the charts and I'm gonna make the new Angry Birds or the new whatever. I think a much more realistic dream is, can you get yourself somewhere in the top 100 and make a solid game with a solid audience that you're constantly up there? I meet a lot of people who you've never heard of with companies that you've never heard of that are making $40,000, $50,000 on a product a month. Right? For most small indie studios, mine alone, I mean, if I had a product right now that made me consistently $60,000 a month, I'd be very happy. That would pay a lot of my bills. And so I think for those people to look at how can you find a product that's going to do, that you have a real chance to do, $60,000, $100,000 a month if you do really well, as opposed to I'm going to go compete against Supercell and make something that's going to make $100 million a month. I think that's a better bet. In terms of the lottery ticket, I guess it's like it's like going in the casino and instead of picking black 55, you're betting on like the top third at the roulette wheel, right?
But it's what I said before. If you don't have your bills, you can take the risk and you can jump into a niche and try something.
And if you have a studio with 50 people, even 60K wouldn't be enough to pay for that. So you have to balance out because if you have a team size of a certain size, you have to use that in a market where the upside is bigger than, let's say, 60 whatever, and that's why I think it makes sense to focus on top grossing where there's a market. If again, it depends on your studio size and kind of how much you're willing to allocate to each of the productions that you do.
Or you should do it 50-50. Half of the studio take the risk, half the studio play safe.
That I disagree with. I think, like, my personal opinion is it's one studio, one direction, one game. That's the only way you can succeed in the market. I don't think doing 4 or 5 shots on goal because of the fact that
that's why we are 20 years already here.
Yeah,
doing that.
Okay. Next question. How do you come up with the right game idea? There's 2 ways to look at it. One way is that you can analyze the market and see what works, a bit like you said. Another way is that you just have an idea in mind that you want and that you're passionate about. So how do you reconcile both approaches, or which approach do you discard out of those?
I'll start on this one. I think that's a false question in the sense that it's one or the other. I think you have to have both, right? If you've got, if you really think this is going to be a game you really, really love, and you look at the market and you say, well, there's no market for this, that's not a compelling answer, right? Yeah. Or if you go analyze the market and you say, oh, look, there's this one kind of game that's doing really, maybe social casino, and you're like, wow, there's a lot of money in social casino, and you and your team have no interest in social casino, that's not going to be a win either, right? Yeah. And so the real answer to this question is, you need to, I would argue, you start with your passion and you say, what is it that I'm going to actually enjoy building? What is it that I have an interest in, that I'm willing to go play a bunch of games and really get to know this genre and enjoy being a part of it, and make sure that that's something that there's a market for. And if you come up with that idea and there's no market, then you got to come up with another idea.
That's most important. If there's no market for your idea, that's risky. And you see many indie developers create the game that they think they want to play. And that's good, but if just they want to play it...
Yeah, even in this show, I mean, without giving any specific example, I saw games that I think are not marketable in any way, but people just made them because they wanted to.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And that's fine if that's what you want to do. I mean, there are hobbyist developers that their dream is to make games that are fun to make, and that you do that for your art, right? But that's a hobby. That's not a job, right?
I'm not talking survival there, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the other side, I've had people come to me and they're like, yeah, we looked and we saw there are 15 games like this, so we wanted to make a game like this, and you see this kind of like completely soulless thing that somebody made because they thought that's what makes money right now. Yeah, the game players, they get that. They know when you don't give a crap about your game. They know when you're not into what you're making. So I think that's the idea that it's one or the other. I think it really has to be both. It has to be something you're passionate about, but it has to be something that you've realistically looked at the market and said, yeah, there's actually a way for me to sell this. And importantly, not just that there's a market for it, but it's a market that you're capable of addressing, that you have an actual go-to plan and you know how you're going to talk to that market and get that product to that market. And I think that's the bit that people miss. Oh, yeah, there's a big, huge market for social casino, but if you don't know how to get to the people who are interested in social casino games, it doesn't matter how good your social casino is, right? I mean, that's the hard part of having a market, is being able to address that market. Does that make sense?
To some extent, I agree with you on that. But my thoughts are, passion is one thing. That's your own motivational of things of doing, or whatever makes you happy. But from a business standpoint, the way I look at it is, I look for a market and I see an opportunity in the market, and then that's what we do because there's an opportunity in the market. And then people tend to gravitate toward, like, everybody wants to work for a successful company, for a successful game. So if you put the pins in the direction of success as an owner of the company, chances are people will then they'll get passion for whatever decision or market or things that you're addressing. They might not have it originally, but they will get it as you become a success in that niche. And if you make those decisions correctly based on analyzing the market and where the revenue opportunities are, then you will win on the passion side afterwards. So I think that's my thoughts on it, that because there's very few people that are super passionate about social casino slots. But that's what I find. I find it really exciting because everybody thinks it's no game developer wakes up one day and think, I'm going to do a slot machine. That would be like the cool, so just by that mere fact, you've eliminated 95% of your competition in it. So you only have the people that actually go into that industry who are doing it with an intention to build a business around it. And that's why it's like accounting, right? It's really boring. Nobody wants to do it, but it's a massively successful business for the people that have accounting firms. Same thing I see with social casino. It's like there's very few people who are really passionate about it. And so because it's not sexy, and when it's not sexy, I see that as a massive opportunity to go in that direction.
But I mean, that sounds to me like you have a passion for that kind of thing, right? I mean, the passion doesn't have to be, I love this kind of game. That has to be within your studio a passion for this thing that you're trying to do, right? And that passion can come from, I really love making first-person shooters, or it can come from, hey, we really think we can make a lot of money at this, and this is something
passion
that
from money.
Yeah, I mean, there's different kinds of passion. I mean, listening to you sound passionate about what you're doing, right? So I think it's false to say that, like, oh, you're doing something you have no passion for. Obviously, you're into it, but you're into it for different reasons. And I don't think it has to be, I love first-person shooters, so I'm making a first-person shooter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Next question then. Is it viable for a small indie studio as of today to try building a free-to-play game? Or should we go premium as indies? Because premium is obviously easier to market, easier to design.
I'll go for it. Free to play forever. No, if you look at market statistics and everything else, there was a huge shift over the last couple of, not even last couple of years, like 3 years or so ago, where it was premium first, was a massive revenue generator, and then all of that shifted onto free to play. It's what the consumers want. Don't try to swim upstream, swim downstream. That's how you win. Users, consumers, everybody wants free-to-play stuff. They want to test it out first and then buy something. And that's where most of the revenue comes in. So for me, it doesn't make any sense to go for premium model. Not for mobile, not for web, maybe for Steam or console. But from my perspective, in terms of mobile and canvas versions on Facebook and whatnot, free-to-play is by far the thing that makes most sense business-wise.
But not for smaller indie studios, I think. It's for you.
Why?
You are bigger, you have the more power to put something in the market, probably more marketing budget, I don't know.
Well, I think the marketing problem is something that can be solved very easily, even if you are an indie developer. If you build a game, you come to any successful person who has a little bit of money in the bank account, and you tell him, I put $1 into marketing, $2 comes out. Do you want to invest? Everybody will say yes. So finding money for marketing expenses is probably the easiest thing in the whole world, in my opinion. If you want,
I've never seen those people, but
so it's more about the finding a game where you can actually do that. That's the difficult part. And
Indeed,
that doesn't matter if it's
now.
free premium or if it's free to play or whatever. But if you build a product that actually, where the users spend more than what you spend on them, getting them in on marketing, it's finding a publisher that's willing to do that is the easiest thing in the world. There's 10, 20, 50 people at this conference that do. So I think just thinking that you don't have $1 million bankroll, you can actually still find partners that are willing to partner up with you to kind of upfront those costs.
I agree, but I think every publisher here gets only today 500 requests, something like that. So only a few will be selected. So still the risk of doing that successfully is almost a lottery ticket.
No, I would disagree. I mean, and with this, I actually agree with Thomas. I mean, it's all about the data, right? I know this hurts me, but it's about the data. If you come to a publisher and you can verifiably say, look, here's the data. Look, here's what our retention rate is. Here's what the LTV of my game is. If you can put that data in front of somebody,
yeah, but you already need to have it.
Well, yeah, that's
the question is if you don't have it.
Yeah, but I mean that's the heart of this. Should you be free to play? Should you not? If you're going to be free to play, you have to have this. You have to have that knowledge. You have to have the skill to do this, or else you're not going to be able to make it work. Because it's free to play is math, right?
Well, the thing is, though, that there was a time in which indeed it was like that. You could reasonably easily build a game in which you inject $1 of UA, user acquisition, and then you get within 1 or 2 months $2 of revenue. But these days are gone, aren't they?
I think so.
No, there are people who are doing that. Not you.
Plenty of games doing that.
No, I've never been successful in that. But yeah, the thing is that nowadays, I mean, the big players in the market have optimized their flow and their data set and everything so much that as an indie, if you don't have the business intelligence that they have, how can you even have a shot at getting data that work for you?
I mean, just to be clear, I'm looking out in the audience right now without mentioning any names. I see 3 people in this audience right now that have games that I know for a fact have an LTV that allows them to do user acquisition.
Okay.
I know that because I know their businesses. So that is definitely one of them is sitting next to me, right? So I know that's a valid form of business. My argument is, again, getting back to the question, I think we have to look at the question a little more. Is free-to-play viable? What kind of free-to-play? Now, if we look at the traditional old free-to-play model, you go to Candy Crush, Clash of Clans, a hard paywall. You can't play my game anymore until you give me some money. I think that free-to-play model is largely dead. I don't think there's a lot of people who are willing to get into that anymore. And what we're seeing is, I think, more advanced concepts of free-to-play, and I think it becomes a spectrum, right? There are people who are like, play all you want, but at some point, do you want to buy this token that gets you an extra percentage chance of making more money when you win? Oh, that's a thing you can buy. Or, hey, do you want to buy this cute little character that makes it more fun to play? Oh, well, you can watch a video to go get that cute little character, right? Those kind of free-to-play models where the game is genuinely free and you can genuinely play as much as you want for free, but there's an add-on value with a relatively subtle pain point that gets you to pay in. I think those are doing quite well. And when you look at what people are calling a premium model, so for instance, we just launched Legends of Kalasia. It's a very traditional turn-based strategy game with a very premium, here's your demo, play the demo. When you're done with the demo, if you'd like to buy the game at a very high price point, you can buy it. And by high, I think we priced it at like $19. So, that's a lot of money for a game these days on Steam. But our conversion to people buying was actually reasonably good on that. But I think in many ways it follows, I wouldn't call it free to play, but the idea that
try and buy.
Well, but in our try and buy, the multiplayer was actually available for as much multiplayer as you wanted to play forever. Right.
Okay.
So there wasn't a point where we said, like in the old try and buys when we used to make games for the Big Fish Hopas, you played 30 minutes and you were done. There was a big paywall and it said, you can't play this game anymore until you give me what $19 or whatever we charge for those things. I think a better model is, hey, play this as much as you want, but here's this other big, huge hunk of content that we will give you, and we're giving it to you at a fair price. Now, whether that fair price is a series of small objects that you can buy in the game, or access to another level, or access to a big hunk of premium game, I think that sense of free-to-play works. And I think that the argument about free to play is evil, I think is a wrong argument. But I think if you go to
that was not the point actually. Yeah, whatever makes money. But is it a reasonable goal to achieve? Right, like you have like a 10 people indie game studio. Do you have a shot at making a free to play, or should you just
I think again it's about I have an addressable market, and what does this market want? When we made a turn-based strategy game, I know for a fact that audience does not want a traditional free-to-play game. That's going to piss that guy off. That's not the kind of game he buys.
Yeah.
But if you're making a match 3 today, which I think is a terrible idea off the bat, but if were you to make a match 3 today, that's an audience that is willing to be in a free-to-play universe, and so that's a free-to-play addressable audience. So I think it's about what is your actual user, what is their expectation, and how do they like to buy games. And to say that a young indie studio can't make a free-to-play game, I think is a false statement. Yeah.
Okay.
The risks are high. I still think that.
Well, but your risks are high in a premium model as well. I mean, if you made a really nice, simple, game for iPad, and that game was really enjoyable, and you're going to price it at $3, there's a lot of people who won't pay $3 for a game. So the risks are high there too.
That's true.
I think as a business owner and game developer or indie or whatever we want to call it, your only objective as an owner of that company is to mitigate risk. It doesn't matter if we're in games or if we're in something else. There's always going to be risk with everything that you do, and that's why you try to mitigate that risk by targeting either niches or proven models that are already there as a business owner. That's just my thoughts on it. So,
that will be the next one will be about that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if you're a small indie studio without money and you want to develop a game, many would be tempted to consider a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Is it something reasonable to try and do? What does it take to succeed? I think Chris can talk on that.
Yeah, so we've been through this. Legends of Glacier, we actually ran it through Kickstarter twice when we were trying to run it, and then we actually ran the DLC that we did for it through. The 2 times we ran the main game through, we did not succeed with our Kickstarter. When we ran the DLC through, that actually did succeed as a Kickstarter. We learned a lot from that. The core lesson that I would take away for crowdfunding is you need to have one of 3 things, right? You need to either be famous, right? So you've already, whether you've got a brand that's famous or whether you personally are famous, if you're Richard Garriott or if you've got the Star Frontiers license or something like that, then that's going to be something that gets the press that brings people to you for your Kickstarter. Or if you've got an idea that is so incredibly interesting that the non-game media would pick it up, so it's something that transcends games and into mass media, so that you can bring people into your Kickstarter from that. That may work. Those are really the only 2 things that I can think of that allow a Kickstarter to function. Because you will find on a Kickstarter, almost all the money you make from your Kickstarter comes in the first 3 days. And those first 3 critical days come from you have to have a mailing list or an addressable audience that's going to come to your Kickstarter immediately when you launch it. Because if they're not there, then you're not going to get promoted by the crowdfunding company, whether it's Kickstarter or someone else like that. You're not going to get promoted by the media. Nobody writes about Kickstarters in the media anymore unless it's already a success. So if you're expecting Kotaku or Polygon to pick up your Kickstarter and promote it, they're only going to do that when it's already successful. And the only way you're going to get to that success is you start with a mailing list, you start with an addressable audience, using something like, what is it? There's that something cloud, I forget what it was, Thundercloud or something like that, where you, Thunderclap or some,
Thunderclap.
Yeah, where you actually can get a bunch of people who are ready to promote your product and can get in it immediately at the same time to push the algorithm up, those sort of things. If you're not doing that kind of stuff, no, it's not going to work. And the vast majority of crowdfunding doesn't work.
Crowdfunding is risky as well. We were involved in the mighty number 9 crowdfunding. That was considered to be a very successful one, but in the end it turned out to be a disaster.
In what sense?
In what sense? They got a lot of money from that. So probably too much money, but they had a lot of money was going to the backers. So they were expecting that there was some money to do investment on the game, but actually in the end there wasn't enough to do the investment in the game. And then when you get short of money, that's where the problems of Kickstarter often come from. So we were a subcontractor with a lot of issues there because the money was gone. So even if it seems like you get a lot of money from Kickstarter, if you succeed, still there is a big risk that a project fails. And now you get certain examples of Kickstarter projects failing. I'm hoping that the audience won't run away there. That I see, okay, this one was not successful, that one didn't work out, that one was cancelled. Yeah, so I'm not going to back anything anymore.
And from the perspective of the studio, there's also the risk of public failure, because it stays there that you have failed the Kickstarter and people can see your history of failed projects. It's not like a game that has failed and you can just remove it from the store and it disappears from public existence. Right?
Yeah, that sucks. I mean, I've got 2 failed Kickstarters that are going to sit up on Kickstarter forever, and that's not cool. But that's how that is. But I think this is the problem: is all of there's been a lot of ugliness in crowdfunding. And it used to be like you could get people to talk about your crowdfunding. Now you say like, oh, let's talk about my crowdfunded game. You might as well have said like, let's talk about my herpes. I mean, it's just like nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody wants to write about it. It's this dirty topic now. Like there's nobody in the press that wants to talk about your crowdfunded game unless you were successful already.
I would say, it pretty much corresponds to what you said earlier. You have to already be famous. Yeah. If you are already sufficiently famous, people will care about your herpes.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Will probably Kickstarter not be a good marketing tool better than an investment tool? I think that's the right perspective to see it.
That's very much true. We thought that we were going to use Kickstarter as a marketing tool, and that was a dismal failure. We got no marketing lift whatsoever from Kickstarter. It's the exact opposite. You have to have the marketing to make the Kickstarter work. So if you're thinking of doing Kickstarter for marketing, don't do that. That's a terrible idea.
Right. Okay. Next question. Where are we going? would you work with a publisher? Would you rather work with an investor or publish by yourself? Would you work with a UA company? I mean, basically, depending obviously on what you're doing, what are the partners that can reasonably help you as an indie, and how do you select them?
What I can say is what we have been doing. Traditionally, we always have been trying to work with publishers. And in the early days when we started, which was 20 years ago, you always needed a publisher. There was no way to publish a game yourself. It was all about retail, and you needed a lot of money to produce the finished goods. So you couldn't even publish yourself. So we always work with publishers, and until now we still do. And I think in the last couple of years, publishers are getting more and more important again. And I wouldn't be surprised that within a couple of years that the old model of there are a few publishers and a few developers gets back, and that it's harder and harder to self-publish as a developer unless you become a real publisher. But I think for a lot of indie studios it will be way better to work with good publishers that know the marketing. You don't have to do it. Team together. Everybody can do the things they are good at. And for us, it still works. And it's getting better and better last year, actually.
Yeah, I'm a control freak because I think as an entrepreneur, you want to be on top. I like having the control myself and not relying on other companies or like partnerships in that way, especially when it comes to marketing and actual money that you're expending and throwing out. I have a hard time. I have trust issues.
So that's why we ask the publisher to do the marketing, so we don't have to throw our money.
Exactly. And so that's the risk we as publishers are mitigating as well. If you have a game that does not sustain us, so you're like the bet that goes on back and forth between publishers and indie developers is we have a game, we want to get it out to people. Publishers say your game's not good enough to sustain marketing, so they're trying to convince us to publish it because their game is not monetizing well enough or performing well enough, so we should take the risk of a couple of $100,000 to put into the marketing and see if it works or not. So we're taking, as a publisher, a lot of that risk, and that's why we're not really, as a publisher, willing to take that risk unless the KPIs and the performance of those games are there. That was
traditional. The publishers are evil philosophy that existed in the 90s as well.
Yeah. There's just, and I think that's self-realization and self-awareness is what am I or what is our company really good at is that only developing games, and if you're really good at developing games, then just do that. But from my perspective, even if I'm really good at developing games, I know that distribution and getting your game out there is such a key value thing in building a business around it, that's something that I want to control of inside of our company. I'll work with thousands of ad networks for media buying and everything, but I want the control, the knowledge of what works and what doesn't work in our team, because that's the value generation, I think, as a bigger company. But if you don't have a marketing department in your indie studio, then it's still something that you can do, or you should understand yourself as an owner or as a founder or as an indie developer, how the distribution side works. I think it's worth investing time into, so you understand the whole process, not just game development, but also the more economics of marketing and how does it work and what works with the consumers, because you can test a lot of things that way.
That's true, but building a relationship with a publisher is also something that isn't something you have to learn, and that's not easy. So it's not that you just go there and say, okay, let's work together, and you're a publisher, we're a developer, let's go. I mean, it's really a difficult path to work together, and if you understand that and do it well, it is definitely profitable for both.
I'd like to share a cautionary tale, if I might. So Boomzap, what we're probably most known for is we were one of the largest providers of content to Big Fish Games. And we did a huge number of these hidden object puzzle adventure games for Big Fish Games. We did their Awakening series, their Dana Nightstone series. These were big series. I think the Awakening series alone, something like 17 million downloads of a premium game, well over $3 million worth of revenue. So these were real games. And for a long time, people were like, oh, wow, this is a really great studio. And people would come to me and, oh, what can we do with the Awakened Brand or whatever. We didn't own any of that because we worked with publishers, and the publishers actually paid for our development. And in return for paying for our development, they got to own the IP, and we made a lot of money, right? During that time, we were a very successful, profitable studio. And we did that 100% with our studio. That's what we did. We did games for Big Fish. And the problem was, at some point in that process, when hidden object games were no longer profitable and not something that Big Fish was interested in doing, and that relationship ended, suddenly we were a studio with 97 people and a whole lot of cash burn and absolutely no intellectual property that we owned and no business. And it sucked. That was a massive, massive problem. And we went from a 97-person studio to what we are now, 27-person studio. I can tell you that was extremely unpleasant as a journey, as an entrepreneur. We lost a great deal of money.
That's what I say. You need to learn how to work with publishers.
But let me get to my point, which is, it's not a matter of learning how to work with publishers. We worked with that publisher great. We had a wonderful relationship with them.
We did as well with Big
until
Fish.
we were no longer necessary to them, right? And what we realized through that was, what has happened over a recent period of time is an unbundling of the publisher model, right? What Big Fish was offering was largely distribution, right? Well, Steam offers distribution. Apple offers distribution. And we can go to Steam. We can go to Apple. Those are conversations we can have. Those are relationships that we can own, right? User acquisition. Big Fish wasn't doing their own user acquisition. They were paying companies to do that. We could go to those companies. We could hold those relationships. So what we have done over the last 2 years is adjusted our model as an indie studio to where about 2/3 of my studio is continuing to work with publishers. We still have publishing partners. We're still doing work on games that we don't own the intellectual property for. But I still have another 1/3 of my studio which I'm funding off of the other two, where we are going and having those relationships, where we are building intellectual property that we own, where I am creating a relationship with Steam and a relationship with Apple and a relationship with our users, right? I mean, one of the most amazing things about our journey through Hidden Object Puzzle Adventures was, after 17 million downloads and millions of dollars of sales, I did not own a single email address for a single user that had played our games. And we had shipped at that point something like 28 games, because we had handed all of that over to our publishers and let them deal with that. But in accordance with dealing with that, they owned all that, right? And suddenly I found myself in 2015 the owner of a very expensive startup with a very large amount of people working for me, and no intellectual property, no way to sell my studio, nothing that I could, no value. All I had was cash burn at that point. And so this has really made me sort of reassess the way that I think about the world. I do think those publisher relationships are important. I think having somebody come in and fund your development and have somebody teach you things about how the industry works and having that experience as part of your journey is important. But I think having a self-published bit of your studio where you're holding some of these relationships yourself is critical, because at the end of the day, all of this work that I'm doing for other publishers, I'm not going to own that. I'm not going to be able to sell that. I'm never going to be able to create an exit for my studio from that. I can't go and sell to an investor because we don't have anything to sell him, right?
No, I agree that you need to share the risk, spread the risks, and that's a good approach. I would do the same.
Just to top up on that, I think the publisher relationship has also been changing because the markets are maturing, at least in mobile. Early on, you have a lot of people that are willing to fund indie developments and say, here's some money because we just want content on the store, and it's a land grab. Now it's matured much more, so publishers and even ourselves, we're not willing to upfront anything on too early a stage for an indie developer. We want to now, because the market is mature and we get 150 publishing offers every single month from indie developers that wants us to publish their games, we get so much opportunities coming in that we can select and say we only want the best performing games out of that, and we only want to fund at a much later stage when you actually have those numbers. And I think that maturity of the markets over the last several years is causing that. So it's making it much tougher for indie developers to actually get paid up front for development of work.
I agree, and I'm not happy about that development, because I think it pushes a lot of risk over to the developers, and I think in some cases unfairly, because we feel that the publishers should share some of that risk. And if they're not willing to share some of that risk, the royalty percentages on the back end really ought to come down for the publishers, and we haven't seen that it does. And in that world, I think the argument for, okay, let's do some of that, but let's also have stuff where we're going and learning how to do our own user acquisition. I mean, you didn't start as a publisher. You started as a developer, and one of the secrets to your success as a developer was that you learned how to do user acquisition, right? That was a secret of your company's success. So I think talking about how other people could get to where you guys are as a successful studio, I think saying, let's have a publisher go do all of that for you, that's not your journey. That's not the journey that you took. Your journey was learning how to do that and create those relationships yourself. And I think that created an enormous value within your studio. So I would argue that other studios should be replicating that same thing.
Which was my initial point, is you need to know that. You need to know your distribution funnels. You need to know your marketing plans. You need to, because it's an essential part of your business. It's like having any other type of business. You have a shop, but you're not doing any marketing. No customers come in. That's great. You have the world's best bakery and you great food and products, but nobody comes to your store. Yeah. That's the same thing in games. You can put it out, you can make great things, and you can be great on one side. But if you don't have this holistic view of what's actually required to be successful, and you don't know that or internalize it in some way, I think you're gonna have a very difficult time. And you'll have people that's gonna, like, because if you go out and talk to ad networks today, they're all gonna say, oh, you have to pay $15, $20 CPIs because they're on the sell side. So they're gonna be like trying to like take all your money out before you've even started doing user acquisition. And if you don't know what the prices are, if you don't have that touch and feel with the market of what you're doing, you're going to get screwed over by every single ad network out there. So you have to have that knowledge on your own. And if you work with a publisher that is, for example, just publishing, they'll take that, they'll give it to someone else, and then they're sitting, like, there's no value creation as a publisher if you are not in, like, control very much, because it's essentially your whole business when you're spending on advertising, or if you're not spending on advertising. Even if you have an organic game, you should still be spending on advertising, for retargeting paying users, for all of these things that makes your business successful.
I would argue, in talking to people who I know run successful studios, and this is something that I have not done as well, it's something I'm trying to improve on myself. People I know who have run successful studios consider the marketing part of their game, the part of their company that handles marketing, as important as the part of their company that handles programming or art or design, right? And I think a lot of studios miss that.
The budget for marketing for a game is at least the same for development. If that's not, if it's not equal, then it's out of balance.
But you can start marketing tomorrow on Facebook, a custom audience for all your paying users to keep them coming back. That makes sense. Even if you're an indie developer, if you have 100 paying users, it still makes sense. It doesn't have to be $100,000 budgets every single day. It's great if it can be, and your game can scale to that, but it doesn't have to be. You have to start somewhere, and I think that knowledge and the touch and the feel of what works and what resonates, what graphics are working the best, the optimization on your app store, all of those things are key things in your funnel to bring people into your game. So if and even if you work with a publisher, there's a lot of publishers that don't care, so they will just smack it up there, say, oh, it's not working, maybe we'll do a couple of split tests. But you care as a developer, you care about your product, you care about the things that you've done, so that passion for it is really hard to translate, even to a publisher, to make them care equally as much as you do about the game that you've developed. Okay. So yeah,
if they don't own the IP, they will never care as much as you do. Yeah. That will never happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question, in order to be on time actually. So if you don't go with a publisher, you do things by yourself, what are the efficient ways as of today to promote your game? Is it still any worth to send PRs to journalists? Would you try to contact YouTubers instead? Would you pay for influencers? How would you do?
We just promote to publishers, so that's the easy way. Mostly.
I think it depends on where you are in both your learning stage on the marketing side and even publishing, if you published multiple games before, what your experience is with those things. But the go-to kind of things are go to Facebook, run some ads there, get some feedback from those users, because you need that in your product development as well.
I guess it depends a lot. I mean, your perspective is mobile games, free-to-play mobile games, where indeed you will do user acquisition from Facebook, etc. Yeah. If you publish a game on Steam, Facebook is useless to you, basically.
I think Facebook has its potential just because you can, like, if you get, I'm not sure about Steam, but if you get information about your users there, you can again bring them back to your or at least top of mind, so you are always branding your game in their newsfeed, basically. So that would be one way, but. I think going forward, the value is going to come a lot from influencers, especially on Steam, because you need people who have a following and people that listen to what you say. And if you can promote your game that way, that's a great way to get started. But I'm doubtful of how scalable it is if you're the influencer yourself. I think it's more scalable if you actually work with existing influencers. And again, that's just part of your marketing budget. So even if in mobile games, you can still do influencers depending on what category you're in. But it's same. I see it as influencers is one thing. You allocate a part of your marketing budget for that. You allocate a part of your budget for TV advertising, for radio advertising, for Facebook digital advertising, and you just see what works for your game and for where your audience is, and that's where you try to reach them. So I think. In order to be more practical and more concrete, I think there needs to be like a real example in this.
Right.
I can provide a real example, actually. And I think what I would argue is that you have to look at where your user is. So we just launched a turn-based strategy game, right? And that turn-based strategy game, we know that audience is on Steam. We know that they do most of their acquisition of games, and most of the knowledge about where they get games comes from Steam, it comes from YouTube, it comes from influencers. We know that's where they are. So our marketing plan was primarily focused on how do we make sure that we have a good Steam page, how do we make sure that we have great assets on the Steam page for the launch, that sort of thing. How do we make sure that when somebody sees our game on Steam and they go to YouTube and they want to see Let's Play Legends of Kalasia, do they see some great Let's Plays? Do they see that people actually played the game and enjoyed the game there? If they go to Twitch and they type in the name of our game, do they see that somebody's playing our game there? That was our focus. Now, I will say we weren't incredibly successful in terms of creating a huge volume of users, but what we did do is we created a very vocal core group of users that were highly supportive of what we were doing and were huge in our success as a game. People that, we had an issue when we launched the game. I won't go into the details, but the Steam store, we didn't put our game in the Steam store in a correct way, and it upset a number of users. And when the reviews started reflecting that core group of users who we had actually brought into the game during the early access period came and responded and said, no, you don't understand. These developers are cool. They're trying hard. And a lot of those reviews actually got changed. And that's something, you can't buy that. I can't go pay for that. That's something that comes through real actual networking with your users, actually getting involved with your users. We started during the early access period of our game actually live streaming the development of our game, where I would do like live design meetings and people would watch the design meetings and comment on them live in Twitch while we were building stuff. That kind of direct outreach to influencers, going to PAX and putting up a big sign that says, we love influencers, come talk to us about how to influence our game. That kind of stuff was hugely successful for building the core of our audience. And that core of our audience has gone out and sort of talked about our game and brought that game to other people. That's been huge for us, and as we move forward, I'm looking at ways that we can increase that and do more with that, because we've seen, when we did other things, like when we got written about in large magazines or people wrote about us in strategy websites, we got no lift from that at all. Nobody watches that stuff. Nobody reads that stuff. It was critically unimportant. We did Facebook campaigns. We could never find a Facebook campaign that actually paid out for us in terms of the cost versus how many people we got off Facebook. But everything we did with influencers, and we paid very little money into influencers. We didn't go out and buy influencers. There were a couple that we sponsored at very low levels, but those were influencers that were already into our game and we were supporting them. If I look at what we spent and what we got out of it, it was very good cost for value.
Yeah. Does anybody in the audience have any question for us?
Basically, what would you like to achieve? Preferably now.
What would we like to achieve now? Is that the question?
I'd like to be very, very rich. Like roll around in my bed covered in money rich.
So
that's what
actually,
I'd like to achieve.
You're the one who has a passion about money, dude.
I got all kinds of passions. Money's one of them.
I think everybody, like there's for some indies, it's just their passion is just to build games and they're happy with that. For me, I want to build something that at least competes on a company that can compete on a global international level with other international companies. I'm competitive that way. I like the competition. I think I tap myself on the shoulder that there's some things that we can do better than other international companies, and that's why I like that high-end kind of competition with those companies, and that's what excites me. Building a global company is my excitement and my goals.
I think for most game developers, this making a good living by creating games is the primary goal. I think probably for all of us, not worrying about money, but doing a good money and doing nice stuff, nice games, working on good projects in a fun industry. I think that goes for all of us, probably.
I think there's massive opportunity in the mobile space. It's just figuring out how to angle your approach to it. The opportunity is, the way I see it, massive. It's just about how you attack the market in your own unique way of doing that.
My goal, actually, but it's a bit contradictory to being in the game industry, is to build a sustainable business. It's been ups and down for more than a decade, and if I could get something that makes enough money and has enough profitability to have, smooth transitions through technologies and trends and etc., I'd be a much happier person.
It's the process. It's not the end goal. That's the exciting.
I'm still on the money thing.
Okay.
Stand behind that.
This might sound provocative, but I really would like to know the answer. So one of you spoke about how he wants to roll around in money. Awesome stuff. The other one wants a very sustainable business. The third one wants a company that's going to compete with the best. And the fourth one wants to have a proper living out of gaming industry. Let's say all of you get that. So you can't count the number of zeros on your bank account. And you have absolutely super self-sustainable business. Would any of you be doing games after that? Or what would you do then?
Absolutely. My dream is to make so much money making games that I no longer have to make money making games anymore so that I can make games. That's absolutely the case.
Wow, you can...
I one time said working in the game industry is something like a virus. You will never get rid of it, and I think it's true.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Same thing for me. I think I would be in the game industry, even if not, like I mentioned before, the opportunity is massive there to reach millions and millions and millions of people on mobile devices. There's very few opportunities outside of games that where you can actually do that. So that's what I find fascinating. So
yeah, I would make games that I really have in mind that I want to do regardless of their marketability, which is something that I mentioned earlier in the talk, but that I wouldn't do in the real life, in real situation for obvious reasons. But if money was not an issue, I would.
As much as we talk about marketing and LTV and all this other stuff, I mean, I got into games when 20 some odd years ago because I used to be a dungeon master in a D&D group. That's how this started for me, right? So that little tiny guy is still inside of me, and he's had the shit kicked out of him for years by this industry, but he's still there and he still wants to make games, and I think if that little dude inside of you ever dies, get out. This is not worth it. There's other easier ways to make money than this. Like, if that little dude's not there anymore, you got to leave. This is not the place for you.
Speaking of leaving, I think we got to leave. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.